For much of the 20th century, the world's attention was riveted by the intense rivalry between Russia and the United States. From the tense standoffs of the Cold War, with its nuclear brinkmanship and ideological battles, to the dramatic moments that shaped global politics, this confrontation defined an era. The world watched as these two superpowers competed for influence, not just in Europe, but across the globe, shaping alliances, economies, and the very fabric of international relations. Today, echoes of that rivalry persist, most visibly in the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. The conflict has brought devastation to the region, reignited old fears, and drawn the world's gaze back to Eastern Europe. Images of tanks rolling through Ukrainian cities and shattered buildings remind us that the struggle for power and influence is far from over. Yet, while headlines remain fixated on this familiar East-West confrontation, a quieter but potentially more transformative shift is underway. On Russia's vast eastern frontier, a new dynamic is emerging, one that could reshape the balance of power across Eurasia. Here, Russia's relationship with China is evolving rapidly, with consequences that reach far beyond the region. As Russia finds itself increasingly isolated from the West, it is turning toward China for economic lifelines and political support. This growing dependence is redrawing the map of Eurasian power, shifting the center of gravity eastward. The flow of resources, investments, and influence is accelerating, and the world is only beginning to grasp the scale of these changes. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, intended to reassert its status as a global power, has instead left it weakened and more isolated than ever before. Sanctions and diplomatic backlash have forced Moscow to seek new alliances, and China has emerged as its most crucial partner. But this partnership is not one of equals. China's economic might now dwarfs that of Russia, with a GDP nearly 10 times larger and a rapidly expanding global reach. Beijing is leveraging this advantage to secure favorable deals, access to resources, and strategic influence, often at Russia's expense. The relationship is increasingly lopsided, with China setting the terms and Russia left with little choice but to comply. In this new reality, Russia is gradually shifting from an independent power to the role of a junior partner. The symbolism is clear in every summit and handshake, as Moscow finds itself increasingly reliant on Beijing's goodwill and economic strength. In this series, we'll delve into the complex history between these two giants, examine how the war in Ukraine has accelerated Russia's pivot to China, and uncover the ways in which Beijing is expanding its influence over Russia's economy, infrastructure, and even its traditional spheres of power. Ultimately, the rise of China on Russia's doorstep may prove to be a far greater challenge to Moscow's future than any rivalry with the United States. As the world's focus shifts, understanding this new relationship is crucial to grasping the forces that will shape the 21st century. The Russia-China relationship has always been a mix of convenience, competition, and mistrust. Briefly united as communist allies, they soon split in the 1960s, clashing militarily and competing for influence. The collapse of the Soviet Union left Russia weakened and China ascendant. In the 1990s and 2000s, they mended ties to counterbalance American dominance, settling borders and cooperating in regional organizations. Yet, even as they spoke of partnership, the imbalance grew. Russia supplied resources and arms, China brought economic dynamism. Today, China's upper hand is clear. Its economic power steadily eclipses Russia's. What began as pragmatic cooperation has become a relationship where China quietly dictates the terms. The legacy of mistrust lingers, but the power dynamic has shifted decisively in Beijing's favor. Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine was a turning point, exposing its military weaknesses and triggering crippling Western sanctions. Isolated from Europe, Russia's economy contracted and its global standing plummeted. Desperate for support, Moscow turned to China, cementing a no-limits partnership, but on China's terms. High-profile visits between Putin and Xi have underscored Russia's new dependence. China now secures Russian resources at discounts, favorable infrastructure deals, and access to military technology. Russia, with little leverage, is forced to accept these terms. The war has not only devastated Russia's military and economy, it has compromised its strategic autonomy. Moscow's subordination to Beijing would have been unthinkable just years ago. Now, it's the new reality. Russia's economic future is now tied to China's goodwill, a dramatic shift from its former position as an energy superpower with global influence. Once, Moscow dictated terms to Europe and enjoyed lucrative deals with the West. Now, after sweeping sanctions and diplomatic isolation, Russia finds itself with few options, forced to look eastward for economic salvation. Cut off from Europe, Russia sells oil and gas to China at steep discounts, with deals like the Power of Siberia pipeline overwhelmingly favoring Beijing. These arrangements lock Russia into long-term contracts that benefit China's growing economy while leaving Moscow with shrinking profits and little bargaining power. Chinese companies now dominate Russian markets, from affordable cars and smartphones to massive infrastructure projects. Chinese brands are everywhere, filling the void left by Western firms and reshaping Russian consumer habits. This reliance hollows out Russian industry, as local factories close and skilled workers lose jobs. China's economic leverage grows, giving Beijing unprecedented influence over Russia's future. Chinese investment targets projects that serve Beijing's interests, securing resources, building belt and road corridors, and expanding China's strategic reach deep into Russian territory. Deals often grant Chinese firms exclusive access to Siberia's vast minerals and timber, raising concerns about environmental damage and economic exploitation. Local communities worry about losing control over their own resources. Russia's economic decisions now hinge on Beijing's approval, with Russian officials frequently traveling to China to negotiate terms and seek investment. If Moscow displeases China, Beijing can inflict severe economic pain by restricting trade, delaying projects, or demanding even harsher terms. The balance of power is clear, and it is not in Russia's favor. In trading independence for survival, Russia is becoming economically beholden to its powerful neighbor. The flow of goods, capital, and technology is now largely one way, deepening Russia's dependency. The cost is steep, eroding sovereignty, long-term dependency, and a future where Russia's fate is increasingly decided not in Moscow, but in Beijing. Russia's pivot to the Chinese renminbi is a stark sign of its new dependency. In the wake of sweeping Western sanctions, Moscow has been forced to rethink its entire approach to international finance. The dollar and euro, once the backbone of Russian trade, have become nearly impossible to use for cross-border transactions. As a result, the renminbi has rapidly emerged as Russia's lifeline, fundamentally altering the country's economic landscape. Sanctions forced Moscow to abandon the dollar and euro, making the renminbi the main currency for trade with China. This shift is not just a matter of convenience. It's a necessity for Russian businesses trying to keep trade flowing and maintain access to global markets, even if those markets are now more limited. Russian companies now settle accounts and issue bonds in renminbi. It's the most traded currency on the Moscow exchange. The renminbi's share of trading volume has soared, overtaking the dollar and euro almost overnight. For many Russian firms, adapting to this new reality has meant learning to navigate Chinese financial systems and regulations. This shift helps Russia bypass sanctions but exposes it to Beijing's monetary policy. While it offers a temporary solution to Western isolation, it also means Russia's financial system is now more vulnerable to decisions made in China, far beyond Moscow's control. The renminbi is tightly controlled by China, giving Beijing another lever over Russia's finances. Unlike the dollar or euro, the renminbi's value and flow are dictated by Chinese authorities, who can adjust policies to suit their own interests at any time. Globally, the renminbi remains a minor currency, so Russia is isolating itself from the wider financial system. This isolation could limit Russia's access to investment, technology, and broader economic opportunities, making it harder to grow or modernize its economy. Instead of true financial independence, Russia has swapped one dependency for another. The country's economic sovereignty is now increasingly tied to the policies and priorities of Beijing rather than the West. The result? Deeper subordination to China's economic agenda. As China's influence grows, Russia's ability to chart its own financial course diminishes, making it more susceptible to external pressures. Russia's financial stability now partly rests in Beijing's hands, a reality that could shape the country's future for years to come. China's influence is expanding in regions Russia once considered its own, Siberia and Central Asia. In Siberia, Chinese firms secure long-term leases and resource rights, fueling local resentment and fears of losing control. Central Asia, once Russia's backyard, is now shaped by China's Belt and Road investments. Beijing is building roads, railways, and pipelines, reorienting regional economies toward China. China's diplomatic and security role is growing, symbolized by summits that exclude Russia. As Moscow focuses on Ukraine, Beijing quietly builds a new order in Central Asia. The result? Russia's traditional dominance is slipping away. China is now the central power in regions critical to Russia's identity and security. The US is Russia's visible adversary, leading NATO, sanctioning Moscow, and supporting Ukraine. But America is a distant power, with no territorial claims or demographic pressure on Russia. The US challenge is ideological and geopolitical, not existential. China, by contrast, is a neighboring superpower with a massive population and a long shared border. Its economic and demographic weight is slowly pulling Russia's Far East into its orbit. China's threat is subtle: economic absorption and demographic change, not military invasion. The US may eventually offer Russia an off-ramp to avoid total subordination to China. For Beijing, a weak, dependent Russia is a strategic asset. For Moscow, the American rivalry is about status. The Chinese embrace is about survival. Analysts worldwide see Russia's subordination to China as a historic shift. Russia's economy is now dwarfed by China's, leaving Moscow little leverage. Cut off from the West, Russia has no alternative but to accept Beijing's terms. Experts warn that China's dominance could lead to de facto control over Siberia and the Far East. Some in Russia's elite are uneasy, fearing that short-term gains mean long-term strategic loss. As dependency deepens, friction within the partnership may grow. The world is watching for signs of Russian pushback or internal dissent. The key question: will Russia realize the danger before it's too late? Russia's gamble on China is backfiring. Instead of regaining power, Moscow is weaker, isolated, and increasingly dependent on Beijing. China now dictates terms, securing cheap energy, resources, and influence at Russia's expense. Russia is reduced to a resource colony and strategic buffer, not a global equal. Its autonomy erodes as its economy and politics intertwine with China's. The Kremlin's obsession with the West has blinded it to the greater threat in the East. The world must watch for cracks in this alliance. Will Russia accept its junior status, or will tensions rise? In seeking greatness, Russia may have signed away its future. The bear now walks in the dragon's shadow.